All right, hey guys, welcome to session 2 for today's Essentials workshop. My name is Holly Schinsky, and I am a developer advocate with the PhoneGap team at Adobe. You can find me in my blogs and tutorials on my blog at devgirl.org, and you could also follow me on Twitter at devgirlfl.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Christophe Coenraets. I used to work with Holly and the rest of the team for many years at Adobe, and I recently moved to Salesforce.com, where I continue to work on Cordova because we have a mobile SDK there that's actually built on top of Cordova. So, with that, we always want to know a little more about you, because that was about us. And what I like to do is to always keep a little souvenir of my audience, if that's okay with you. If you're not supposed to be here, that's the time where you should hide probably under the table. So let me do my best here. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, nice. Excellent. Thank you. I'll bring that home. This is really cool. All right. So then the question is, what am I using here to actually run my slides and do my presentation? Any idea? That's a cheap, easy question, right? What is that thing that I'm using to take a picture of you in the middle of my slides and bring it home, maybe upload it somewhere? What is that thing? Exactly. Thank you. If I had some kind of T-shirt or something like that, you would get one, but I don't. So yes, basically that thing that I'm using to run my slides and that I'll be using throughout the presentation here is actually a PhoneGap application. And it's great because not only I can take pictures of you, but I can also show you, so we'll cover a number of topics, a number of plugins, a number of APIs. And instead of trying to describe what's happening on a slide, I can actually show you, the feature in a running application. And so I think that's actually a pretty cool way of doing it. So what will we present to you guys in this part of the presentation? There was a question earlier today about, Apple and do they reject applications specifically written with PhoneGap or Cordova. And I think Michael gave a really good answer. That has been my experience too. I have a bunch of applications in the App Store, and they never reject because it's a hybrid app. They will reject because the experience is not good, because the performance is not good, or for other reasons related, to their expectations in terms of user experience. I think that's really what matters to them. So in this module, what we will try to do is to give you all the tricks and best practices to build applications that makes us proud, that that give PhoneGap and Cordova a good name, and that will make sure that your application doesn't get rejected. So we'll try to give you these best practices to build applications that perform and that are well architected. And to do that, we'll walk you through two applications. The first one this morning, if it's still the morning, will be kind of custom built. And we will go through all the typical issues that you may run into when building a hybrid application. It sounds great, it's a web app, and you say, hey, that's great because I know how to build web apps, but there are a bunch of things that you need to be aware of to make sure that your application performs well and is well architected. So we'll do that this morning. We'll take you through all these techniques if you want. And then in the afternoon, we'll essentially build the application, the same application, with an existing framework. Okay? And we had to pick one, and there are a lot of options out there, and this is by no means a kind of a a choice of the best framework out there, but we just wanted you to experience what it is to develop an application with existing frameworks. So we'll rebuild the same application using AngularJS and the Ionic framework on top of that. So if you have never used these frameworks, that should be interesting. So what you have here is actually the URL. And I'd like all of you will really test the network here. I'd love all of you to actually either download the zip file or just clone that repository. Okay, and we have some time, so if it's slow, that's fine, because initially we'll just present some materials before we look at code together. So please go to that GitHub repo, and again, either you git clone it or you simply download the zip file, the master zip file. So while you are doing that, Holly will show you the end result of that application. So I'll leave the slide like a couple of more seconds here so that you can get to it. And,
be sure to fully qualify it as well with the PhoneGap
Yep.
workshop, or you'll get an error.
All right, and you can go ahead actually. And
if you go to the top right corner, you'll see the GitHub project. Click on that, and then you'll go in there to actually clone it or download the zip.
which network are you on? Yeah, that's the problem. Go. Okay, you good?
Oh.
Yeah, but you don't need that.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
You need to mirror.
Oh. All right, can everybody see that okay? Do you want to move it over a little? No? All right, so basically, you guys kind of saw this in the last session, but we're building a simple conference app. So it's basically going to manage the sessions of the day for the PhoneGap day. We actually have all the speakers from tomorrow and today in here. And so when you go into it, you should be able to search for a name of a speaker. So if you enter a couple letters or different letters, you're going to get different results back depending on your search. And once you click on a certain session, then you're going to get the details of it. So it's pretty simple. It's basically like a list and a detailed view approach, and then you'll see how we go about building this to feel native throughout this session. So at the bottom, we're going to go into this a little later, so I'm not going to show you all of this right now, but you'll see we implement a tab bar, and in the tab bar we have a couple options. So you can favorite a session, you could add it to your calendar, so that's actually going to add it to your native calendar using a plugin, which we will add later in the workshop, and then you could also share it. So if you wanted to share this particular session through text or through email, we have a plugin that we'll add that we can show you how to use in your own projects to do that as well. So we'll get into that more later in the workshop. But basically, when you run it on your device, this is what you should see, is be able to enter in letters, pull up people, and see the tab bar at the bottom. Eventually, we're going to walk through step by step through different pieces of the workshop, so you're not going to see all of this at once. We're actually going to show you step by step how to handle these different things, but this is the end result.
Great. Okay, and so to go back to the question, and we'll show you that during the workshop. But one of the reasons, you know, Apple may actually reject your application is, and that happened to me before, is they will say, well, you know, this is really a website. There is nothing, you are not using the capabilities of the phone. And so we will make sure in this workshop that we show you how to use kind of advanced capabilities of the device. Like for instance, this afternoon, we will show you how to use push notification. So because that's kind of one of the things that, you know, you want to do these days to engage with your users, because otherwise the risk is that your application still sits there on that device and people forget about it. So you need to remind people that the application is there by providing them with, you know, interesting messages and stuff like that. So we'll have push notification, we'll have integration with the calendar on your device, we'll have integration with Facebook as well to really kind of build an interesting application. All right, so how many people were able to download or clone the repo? Wow, woohoo, that's great. Okay, all right, so we'll start, and so as I mentioned before, we'll simply take you through a couple of, you know, best practices and key concepts this morning, and I will start with data access. And so in this application, so it's a conference application, so obviously we have data, and the data is basically a list of sessions, a list of speakers. And what is oftentimes a good or best practice is to provide a kind of an abstraction layer on top of your data access strategy, because that data access strategy may change based on, you know, your own decisions, but also based on the situation of the user. So for instance, if I'm offline, obviously I cannot access a REST service, so I would need to fall back to a local storage or an embedded database or something of that nature. So a good approach is typically to have most of your application completely isolated from the data access strategy and provide a common interface that I represent here on the slide with that data interface box. It's a common API, you know, get sessions, get speakers, and things like that. And most of your application, certainly the views of your application, have no idea how you will actually get the data, but depending on the underlying service, you know, you'll get your data through a REST service, through access to the local database, or maybe something else like local storage. So if you want to take a look at the application, and maybe that can be in module 5. So you will see that we have different modules in the code, and we are kind of building on top of each module. So if you open let's open module 6 actually, and under JavaScript there, you have services. And you see that this is just my service layer or my data access layer, and that I have different ways of accessing my data. And for instance, the first one is very basic, and it's an in-memory data store. So I have a list of sessions here in an array, and then I have that basic API, you know, find session by name, find session by ID, and that kind of stuff. Now, you will notice here that I have something a little different than what you may be used to, and let me make that a little bit bigger. Anybody familiar with that syntax? Deferred objects? Yeah? Okay, so these are essentially kind of a way to build asynchronous, you know, services. It's basically what we call a promise, and you typically use that when you make an asynchronous call. Now, is retrieving data from an array typically an asynchronous operation? Do you need to build an asynchronous API to retrieve data from an array? No. So Any idea why I may be doing it here? Yeah, that would be an interesting idea. So kind of keep the UI really fast and kind of do that in the background. That's a good response. Yes, but there is something more fundamental based on what I said before. Exactly. So what I want is really a pluggable data access layer where I can, unplug this memory adapter if you want and plug a REST API adapter instead without changing anything in the rest of my application. So it's almost like dependency injection. I remove a service, in this case the in-memory service, and I insert a REST service instead. Now, for these things to be really pluggable, they need to have exactly the same API, okay? And if you make a REST call, that has to be asynchronous, right? So therefore, you're going to fall back to the common denominator, if you want, and you are going to make all the data access services asynchronous so that they are really pluggable, okay? They can really work with the same API. So let me show you, for instance, and you can open that code and look for yourself. So there is, for instance, a JSON service, so a JSON implementation of the same service. And as you can see here, I'm actually simply using an AJAX call, and the AJAX call, I'm using jQuery here, but this would be the exact same thing if you use Angular or any way XML HTTP request. It's always asynchronous, and when you make that call, you're going to receive a promise back. So the reason why I made that API asynchronous in the memory adapter or even in the local storage adapter is to be compatible with this. Okay, so for instance, how do I really inject a service? So in this implementation, it's very, very basic. So if you open index.html, you will see here that I open a specific, or that I insert, if you want, a specific version of the service. So in this case, I'm using the memory service. All right, but in my application, okay, I will instantiate that service, and depending on the script tag, this is going to instantiate the in-memory, the JSON, the local storage. And then after that, so if I say, service find by name, at this point, as the developer of that part of the application, I have absolutely no idea how the data will be retrieved, right? I use that common find by name API, and it's always magically going to work because I use that promise type of API, the asynchronous way of doing things. Okay? So that's kind of a way to, simple practice, good practice to build pluggable data adapters. The key thing to make that work is to make sure that you expose an entirely similar API so that you can plug and play them. Yes, question. API accessible via libraries, so you pick and choose which certain functionalities. Yeah. So now, I mean, this is just a very simple implementation. You will see, like for instance, this afternoon, that when you use AngularJS, for instance, they have a more formal way to do dependency injection, and then you can say, you can basically inject a specific implementation of a service in a very, streamlined way. Like what other library, if it's not JavaScript? Well, no, not the JavaScript, Yeah. Absolutely anything, or even your own way of, it can be a plain XML HTTP request, for instance, if you want to go really bare bones. Okay? All right, so we covered that, and now I will be able to really experiment with my application running on my device here, because there is a button here. that's inviting me to click it, so I'm going to do that. Wow, it says, don't be that guy. So here is another good practice, and this actually may be so bad, a small detail here, that your application may actually be rejected just for this. This is kind of silly, but your application may be rejected just for this. So why don't I want to be this guy? What did I do here as a lazy JavaScript developer? I used an alert. And what does the alert do? It does that, but also it reveals the fact that I have a hybrid application here. Because look at the title of that alert. It's index.html, and now you just gave away the fact that, in fact, you're running a web app. And so that's, you know, only geeks really care about that. But think about the user in general would be like, you know, what is that thing, index.html? It's confusing. So what's the solution to fix that problem? Very easy solution. What is it? Use a native alert. And how do I do that? I use a plugin, and it's really the Dialogs plugin. So I think Michael covered that before. So you would simply use the CLI to install Cordova plugin, add org Apache Cordova Dialogs. Let's see how this works. Ooh, much better. See, now you have complete control over the UI. You can customize the buttons. You can customize the titles. This is absolutely native, and nobody will ever know that this is a JavaScript application, at least if you follow along and you implement the rest of these best practices. Okay, now relax, let's relax. Okay, there was a question. Over here. Yes? Do you use the config.xml
Yes.
for PhoneGap build?
When you use that, though, you're going to be specifying the gap plugin. Do you know that syntax? Yeah, so it's already included when you generate a project with the PhoneGap CLI. So it's in there for you.
Now, if you look at this code here, that's what a navigator notification alert is the code that I had to write to get that nice native notification. So you may be tempted at this point to global find and replace your alerts with that. But if you did that, what would be the problem now? You break it in the browser. Your application doesn't work in the browser anymore because the browser doesn't know what navigator notification is. And one of the key principles as a developer of hybrid apps is that you really, really, really want your app to be runnable in the browser, because it's a lot easier to debug in Chrome, for instance. So even though we made good progress in remotely debugging hybrid applications, it's really, really good to be able to debug your application in the browser. So if you start putting native plugins code in your web app like this, then it's not going to work in the browser anymore, and you're going to have to debug everything, every single line of code on a device, and that's not really good. So if you look at the code, I mean, there are many, many ways to work around that, but here's what I did. I said, if the plugin exists, so in other words, if navigator.notification exists, so that's essentially the plugin, then what is this? What am I doing here? So if the plugin exists, what am I doing? Exactly, I override the JavaScript alert function, okay? So that with that, every single place in my application where I use an alert, if I'm actually running on a device with the plugin installed, I'm going to have a native alert instead of the JavaScript alert. However, if I'm running the same application in the browser, I'm still going to have the regular JavaScript alert. So that's a simple way to account for, the fact that you're running on a device or that you're running in the browser, but please do it. Don't be that guy. Don't show that your application is actually hybrid when you run on device. Okay? All right. So let's move on to the next topic. All right, that one is really important as well. A key reason why your application may be rejected is because it may be slow or sluggish, kind of not a fluid user experience. And by that, I mean something like this. So this would be a list somewhere in your application, and the user has to select an item. So I'm going to try to do that. Okay, I'm going to do this and see what happened here. So I'm going to do it again. And so basically that number that you see at the bottom is the delay between the time I actually tapped that item and the time my application got notified in the event handler. Okay, so it took roughly 300 plus milliseconds for my application to be able to do anything with it. For 300 milliseconds, I didn't even know that that thing happened. Now, sometimes people say, who cares? 300 milliseconds, are you kidding? No, I'm not kidding. This is really, really important. This is the difference between a responsive application and an application that doesn't feel native, because there is that slight delay that people feel. Okay? Now, why is that delay happening? And we will speak specifically about iOS 8 in a second, but why in general would that delay be happening? Because as a JavaScript developer, you handle this list with the click event. All right, so basically the event handler that you're using is the click event, and that's, I basically set up a click listener. Okay, the operating system, at least until iOS 7 included, wanted to know, using a pretty basic approach, if you were going to double click or single click. And to know if you were going to double click, it was just going to wait 300 milliseconds. If it didn't receive a second click, then it assumed a single click. And if there was a second click, then it would be the double click event, that you would get. Okay? So there is a better way of doing that, no matter which version of the operating system. So let's try that again. This should be a lot faster. Look at that. I get 3, 2, consistently 2 here, 2 milliseconds instead of 350. But now, if you paid attention to the name of the event at the bottom, what is the event that I'm using now? Instead of click, I'm using a touch start and touch end, and I'm doing the difference there. So once again, you're going to say, easy, right? Find, replace, click by touch start, or something like that. But again, if you did something like this, you break your app in the browser. Your application is not going to work in the browser. So what's the solution? You're too smart. Or you saw this before. What's the solution? Well, initially, you may say, OK, well, I'm going to test, somehow, identify if touch events are available, right? In that case, I'm going to register touch start and touch end. But if they are not available, then I'm going to register a click event handler. And that is a lot of work to do, especially because there are some edge cases like, for instance, when you are scrolling a list, and you have to have everything right, and that is a lot of work. So yes, indeed. Who said fast click? OK, great. Still no T-shirt, but good answer. So fast click is a library that was built by some smart guys at the Financial Times. It's entirely open source. It's on GitHub. And it does exactly what I described for you. So it knows if the environment supports touch events. If yes, it's going to kind of replace your click event handler. So in your code, you still register click event handlers. And if touch is available, they are going to hijack your click events and replace them by touch events. Now, in iOS 8, this was supposed to be fixed, but apparently there are still some issues, and so you may still need to use fast click, if you kind of get into these issues. And so I would recommend you follow the last messages on the fast click repo on GitHub to know exactly what to do. But it will account for the fact that you may be running on iOS 8, and then it will not, do things that are not needed. But if you're still serving or iOS 7 devices, definitely you need to do that. All right, so these were some quick, tips that are important to get an application that performs and that looks and behaves very native. Now we're going to talk about things that are more at the architectural level, because fast click, in fact, I forgot to show that to you. Okay, I have it here. See, fast click is not a big thing that you have to do to your app. This is essentially you add a script, you include the library if you want, and then you add that line and you are done. So that's what I meant by, this is a lot easier than having to do it yourself. So fast click is the best thing you can do to improve the performance of your application on mobile devices in essentially 2 lines of code. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slides here and speak about architecture for a little bit, because when people start with PhoneGap or Cordova, they are super excited because they say, hey, great, it's web, it's the web stack, and I've been building web applications for 20 years, in PHP, in Rails, in JSP, ESP, so I know how to do this. It's going to be a piece of cake. And the applications that they used to build looked like this, right? This is essentially a sitemap of a traditional website. And behind each of these boxes, you have some kind of server-side script. It doesn't matter if it's written in PHP, ESP, JSP. There is some server-side script that is going to generate HTML, and that HTML gets shipped to the client where it's rendered. Is that the way you should build a PhoneGap application? Probably not if I ask the question. That's a smart guess. But why not? I mean, there are at least 2 things that are really kind of dramatically bad if you did it this way. And by the way, you can. And sometimes you will. And I'll explain that in a second. But most of the time, you won't. And why not? 2 key reasons. Yeah. In my early days working with the PhoneGap team, I visited a lot of customers, and they told me, oh, PhoneGap is so slow. I can't use it. It's too slow. I said, OK, well, let's look at your code. And oftentimes, they used, at the time, jQuery Mobile with the mode where every page was actually fetched from the server. And I was like, PhoneGap isn't slow. Loading pages from a server is slow. And that's because of network latency. Okay? That has nothing to do with PhoneGap or any other technology. If you did the same thing in a native app, it would behave the exact same way. So don't do that. So that latency performance is a key issue. And the second issue is that when people use a mobile app, they kind of expect that something will work offline. And of course, if you rely on a server to generate the UI of your application, nothing is going to work offline, which, by the way, it is a major reason to reject applications as well. Apple, I was told that the first thing they do when they test an application is they disconnect from the network and see what happens. And if nothing happens, if you literally have a black screen, then they are not even going to test it further. Okay? So your application has to do something offline. Okay? So we are not doing that. Oops. Instead, we are doing this. We're going to build the HTML locally at the client side, and this is what we call a single-page application that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. By the way, how many people have ever built a single-page application type of app? Okay, so a good number of you. All right, so you know what it is. This is the only static HTML page that you have in your app. I'm not kidding. It's essentially an empty body. But the trick is that app.js file, which may be huge because this is where programmatically in JavaScript, you're going to generate all the views of your application, okay? So to quickly kind of review the difference between the two approaches, and a lot of that is just review, the place where the UI is going to be generated is going to be the client side instead of the server side, and therefore your application is going to run offline. You do it in JavaScript as opposed to your preferred, server-side scripting language. It works offline. You are totally in charge of page transitions, and it's fast because you don't have to go to the server. You could even build an application like a game or something like that that doesn't go to the server at all. Okay, so this is going to be fast. Okay, but what I wanted to spend a few minutes on is that sounds all good, but building these huge apps in JavaScript doesn't come without challenges. When was the last time you worried about a memory leak in a traditional web application, in a PHP application? When was the last time you said, oh my God, I hope memory is not going to leak here? Probably never, right? Because the life expectancy of a page in a browser is a few seconds or a few minutes. People load the page and then click a link and boom, the page is gone and the DOM is entirely refreshed. So you basically have a new DOM, and if there was a memory leak in some JavaScript, it doesn't matter because as soon as you link to another page, it's gone, okay? In a single-page application, as the name implies, it's a single page, so it's a single DOM. So all that JavaScript that you keep running, it keeps happening in the same, memory space. Okay, so if you start leaking memory, you're going to know pretty fast. Because in this case, the life expectancy of that page is not seconds, but potentially days. All right, so if people don't kill your application, you would be in trouble. So let's see how we can tackle some of these new challenges very quickly. So the first time you may build HTML in JavaScript, which is what I told you you would do, you will build something like this. And what's wrong with this? So you see I'm declaring a variable HTML equals blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I basically create an HTML string in JavaScript, and that's how I will build my views. How many people do this? A couple. Is that fun? Is that easy to maintain? Is that easy to build? Can you use a tool to give you tag completion and stuff like that? No. Yes? With some IDEs you can, but that was time not that well spent from these IDE vendors. Because they shouldn't help you do that, I think. Because there are really better ways. In fact, remember in the good old days, how many people are old enough that they wrote like CGI applications, like 20 years ago, right? So that was that. Instead of JavaScript, you were doing that in C, which was even more fun, right? Or in other languages. And people said, that's insane, because every time marketing asks me to change the background color of something, I need to go change my C program and recompile and redeploy. And so people came back with that great idea of doing what? Externalizing the HTML in what people called a template. And that was how PHP and Cold Fusion at the time and ASP and JSP, that was really the idea. Externalize that stuff in a template that you could edit without recompiling code. Okay? So we're going to do the exact same thing here. So to build these applications, use templates. Okay? And there are many, many template engines out there. Now, you see the difference here. Maybe it still looks ugly to you, but at least that is pure HTML, okay? And in the middle of that HTML, you see the purple stuff. These are essentially placeholders where you will merge typically your data model, just like in PHP, just like in all these other templating solutions. So in this case, in the JavaScript world, the only difference now is that this is going to be done at the client side instead of being done at the server side. And there are many, many options to, to build templates in JavaScript. Some of them are, I think the most popular one these days are handlebar JS, mustache JS. If you use underscore JS, it has a built-in templating solution. There are many, many others. If you use Angular JS, it has templates built in as well. So please use that. So if you go back, so let's take a look at some code now. And let's look at module 8 if you follow in the code. Otherwise, you can just look at what I'm doing here. And this is a pretty lame way of doing it, but I'll tell you why I'm doing it that way. So you see I'm in index.html here. And I still have an empty body tag, sort of, because in that empty body tag, this is not HTML per se. See, this is a script with a type of text template. So these are my templates, okay? And in some of them, okay, I have these placeholders. So I have a template here to actually display a list, and see I have the placeholders, the double curlies to display first name, last name. Now, this is one way of creating templates in script tags. And the only reason I did it this way for this workshop is so that you can run, in fact, if you have if you download or clone the repository, you can actually double-click index.html on the file system, and the application will run just fine. Okay? But what would you really want to do instead of having that thing? Because it's fine for a simple application like this with 2 templates. Imagine I have 200 templates. What do you really want? You want these templates to exist in separate files, right? So you would want like a home.html, session list.html. As soon as you do that and you try to load these files programmatically in JavaScript, what are you going to run into? So I load my application from the file system, the main app, so index.html and app.js. And then from there, I'm trying to load files, which are essentially my templates. Well, I'm going to get into cross-domain policy issues, right? Because from the file system, I'm not going to be able to use XML HTTP request. And so that's fine. What's the solution is to run a small server locally, or a big server locally, okay, so that you don't load from the file system, but you load using the HTTP protocol, and then you can load external files using XML HTTP request, right? So this is really for you to be able to load the app from the file system, but in a real life scenario, you certainly wouldn't want to do it this way. You would externalize these files and then load them using essentially an AJAX call. Make sense? Very cool. And then in this case, so in this lab, we decided to use handlebar.js. So if you have never used handlebar.js, you can actually look at some code here in app.js. You see that what we're going to do here is compile that template, okay? And when we compile a template, so I have two templates here, one for the home page and one for the session list. When you compile a template, what it's really doing, it's creating a function that takes a model as an argument, so that later in your application, here is what I can do, for instance. Okay, so find by name. So I'm searching for a list of sessions, and when I get it, I will invoke that function that was obtained by compiling. So this is the function. The return value of compile is actually a function. But the nice thing is that, look, it's actually taking a data model so that you can actually merge your data into the template. And whatever field is available in that object here, session, you can actually inject using, wow, that's the first time someone takes a selfie with me. So that's a first, so I needed to acknowledge that. So that's cool. Yeah. All right, so yeah, so it creates a function, and then you can invoke that function passing the model, and that's how you merge the data into your template. Does that make sense? Okay, so handlebars, if you don't know what to use, is probably a safe choice. Now, if you looked at the application so far, in fact, so it still looks very messy. You see in app.js, so I have things like, okay, I'll have a function to render the home view, and then I have find by name, and find by name is going to render the list and things like that. So that is cool for my little application here. But as your application grows, what you really want to do is to start structuring provide structure to your application, and typically you will look for some kind of an MVC type of architecture, okay? And so what I'm showing here is just an example, because every framework is going to do that differently. So this is very kind of Backbone-like. So if you have used Backbone before, you will see that it's very similar. That's kind of a custom implementation that we use in the workshop. So you would have some sort of a class to represent the model, so the data in your application. You would have some sort of a class to represent the views, okay? So that is really kind of the user interface of your app, okay? And you would have some kind of a class to represent controllers, so utility classes, maybe helper classes and that kind of thing. And I'm not spending too much time on this because it doesn't really matter the exact way you implement it. What really matters is that you think about that, and that you don't show up with an app.js that has 2,000 lines of codes, which would typically be a major red flag. Okay, so back to, and so again, this afternoon we'll see a concrete example of that when you use AngularJS. We'll see how to do it that way, and how AngularJS implements and provides structure to your application. Back to some little things that you need to be aware of, and that really depends on the platform. Don't give up the fact that your application is not native by offering a laggy scrolling to your users. And you'll see a lot of web apps that when you run them in the web view on a device, the scrolling just doesn't feel right because it's not implemented natively, okay? And until couple of years ago, there was really no way to do that very well in a hybrid app, and people used to scroll views. So if you had a list that you had to scroll, there was a library at the time that was super popular that was called iScroll. And what iScroll did, it really scrolled your view in JavaScript. And that was really nice because that was the only way to do it, and it was optimized the best it could be to do it in JavaScript. But since then, unless you target really, really old devices, and of course everything is relative now, but really, really old maybe mean like a few years, there is a way in iOS and on iOS and on Android to do it natively with just some CSS. And so the prefix may be different here, but I just give you an example, and it's implemented in the lab. If you're targeting a modern platform, simply do something like WebKit overflow scrolling touch, and you will have the native implementation of scrolling, and it's going to be super smooth. Okay? So try to avoid like these old techniques that you may still see in some examples or some applications. Question? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you, especially on Android, if you are still dealing, and that happens in the Android world specifically, if you're still dealing with versions of Android that don't support this option, then you need to fall back on iScroll or a library, a library like that. Question? Do you want to talk to that, Holly?
There's actually going to be a presentation about that tomorrow, so look forward to that. But that is true. Yeah.
Would that work on old devices? We'll find out tomorrow. We'll find out tomorrow if that would work on really old devices. I'm not sure about that. On the same topic, a really major issue, and again, kind of giving away the fact that your application is not native, is transitions. Like, the most typical transition in a kind of a data-driven application is like sliding pages from the left or from the right. And there are ways to do that slowly and ways to do that fast. Okay? So choose the fast way of doing it. And it's not always obvious because you'll see a lot of examples out there that use maybe the most obvious way to play with CSS to slide your pages. But it's not always the hardware accelerated way, and that's really what you want. So kind of showing you a typical example represented on the slide here. That's often the way it works, right? You have your main view, the view that's in scope, in the center here, and then you have maybe a view, the blue one, that you need to slide from the right. Okay, so it's going to move left, or the other way around. If you hit the back button, typically you'll have a sliding from the left. Okay, so you move it to the right. So for instance, if I click center here, I'll put that one, move that one to the center, move it back to the right. And even with the delay of my streaming thing here, you see that it feels, and this is actually running in my PhoneGap application. Oops, sorry. You see that it's smooth. Okay. So let me show you what I meant by slow and fast. So this is the way, unfortunately, you see a lot of people doing it in CSS. You can do all that in CSS, right? And so remember, let me go back here. So I had basically a page class, and then right, center, and left. These are all CSS classes, okay? And so basically the way I position the view that's on the left is by saying left is minus 100%, and that's minus 100% of the viewport, okay? So that's why it's going to be positioned exactly to the left of the viewport, and right is with a left attribute of 100%, which means that it's going to be positioned just to the right of the viewport, okay? And so to actually animate a view to its new position, I will simply change its class name. So like that blue thing on the left, it has a class of right, a CSS class of right, and I will programmatically change its class name to center, and it's going to move it to the center, and it's going to be animated because I also put the transition class on these views, and I decided that I wanted a 1/4 of a second duration of that animation. Are you guys still with me? So you simply change the class name of the view. If you didn't have transition, then it would simply, boom, show up in its new position, but you animate the transition. This approach is going to work fine, but it's not going to be hardware accelerated. In other words, this is going to run on the CPU and not on the GPU. Okay? So to get the same stuff, the exact same effect, but using hardware acceleration, you will do this. It's very, very close, right? But instead of simply using the left and right attributes, you will apply transformations, and a Translate 3D will automatically implement hardware acceleration. These transitions will be implemented, will be executed on the GPU. But other than that, it's again -1. You basically transform it to -100% or plus 100%. It's pretty much the same thing, but it's hardware accelerated. Yeah, so that's a good question. So like, for instance, if you debug in Chrome and you use the developer tools, you can actually access that information. If you were to debug remotely on Safari, for instance, so you can implement remote debugging on Safari. So run the application on the phone and then use the Safari Web Inspector. I think you can get the same information. Okay, see what how these transitions are executed. Okay. Right, yeah. It tells you the frame, repaint, and stuff like that. Definitely in Chrome, you can do it. Yeah, so I think you need to look at the documentation for the web inspectors and the developer tools. There are plenty of videos showing how that works to kind of get to that level of information in the developer tools.
Got a question?
Sure, absolutely. I will share these slides before we leave today. Well, display flex by itself, is not like you're simply essentially defining a layout policy at that point. But if you move that layout, that's it's totally possible to animate a flex layout using hardware acceleration, but again, it's the Translate 3D that's going to define that. So in other words, whether you use display block, display flex, display whatever, that's not what defines whether it's hardware accelerated or not. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. So yeah, applying some kind of a transform on a flex layout. That is a good question. I would have to look into that. I would hope so, since flex is a fairly new feature. Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Other question? Yes. Well, how is the performance of this fast approach on older devices? They may not support it. So again, if it's an old device, it will not. So that again, this is unfortunately one of these situations where, just like native scrolling, that you may have to trade off and say, I'm going to stop supporting these old versions of Android, or I'm going to still support them, but then not get the best performance, or write code to identify your environment and selectively choose one of these approaches. Say that again?
Media queries.
Oh, media queries, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are different ways to identify the capabilities of a device, yeah. Okay, so this is my shameless plug to my own little library that I call Paige Slider. If you're looking for something super lightweight, you're looking for a micro library to do that. Essentially, I don't deserve a lot of credit, because essentially this is what it does with some JavaScript to provide a nice API to that. But if you're looking for something super lightweight, this is something that I wrote and put on GitHub, and it does just that. All right, and with that, I think we're gonna stop here for the kind of the overview of the different approaches. Holly is going to take over and discuss some advanced techniques and plugins that you can use in your applications, and specifically in that conference app. But since this slide is on the screen, this is really where we will start after lunch, because I don't know if you realized that, but what you just had before this session was actually not lunch. At least I hope so. I don't want to that's what I was told. No, I may be in major trouble if it was actually lunch. But so I think that was snack. That's right. Thank you. Good. So after lunch, we will dig deeper into this. And so I'll give you a quick intro, and then Holly will spend some time on the advanced features of the application. Oftentimes, and that was always the case when I spoke to customers about Cordova and PhoneGap, people always want to know what the best framework is. And of course, the answer is, well, it depends. It depends on your background, what you like, the type of application that you're building. It depends on a lot of things. But we found it useful to kind of provide some guidance, because sometimes it can be really overwhelming, the landscape of frameworks out there. Great. Good feedback on Twitter. Okay. So the way we started talking about it is using this slide and talking about two types of frameworks. I think that's really helpful to a lot of people. And on the left, you have what we call full stack frameworks. And these are frameworks that try to solve all the problems that you may find in when building a hybrid application. So from basic DOM manipulation to how do I build the MVC architecture for my application, to I want my application to look nice, so please give me some cool looking components, okay? You see that, by the way, isn't that cool that my PhoneGap application is built responsively? You see that the layout adapts when it turns. That's cool. Anyways, so on that side, you have things like Sencha Touch and jQuery Mobile, and Dojo, even though I'm not sure how many people still use it today when building mobile web apps. So these frameworks, they cover everything. So the advantage of these frameworks is obviously that it works together. You don't have to spend time on the integration. The downside is that it's super hard to unplug one layer. Say, for instance, you're using Sencha, but you don't like their UI components. Or you like their UI components, but you don't like their MVC layer, and you would rather use Backbone instead. Well, good luck with that, because they were not built to be used that way, right? They are basically a one-stop shopping kind of thing. Even though, you'll find blogs that, and I've been guilty of doing that, how to use jQuery mobile with Backbone. So I wrote that one. At some point, if you fight the framework, maybe you should just not use it, okay? Or you should use it the way it was meant to be used, or not, okay? So that's kind of the benefits and the downsides of those. On the right, it's basically built your own stack. Some people say, okay, well, you don't even need a DOM manipulation framework anymore because natively JavaScript does everything that jQuery does. And jQuery is pretty heavy. So, whether you want to use it or not is your choice. So you pick it or you don't. And then I think the big debate today is in the middle there. What is the MVC framework that I'm going to use? Again, there are many options, including some that are not on the slide, like React and things like that. Okay, so Backbone, Knockout, Angular, Ember, React are some options. But these frameworks don't do anything in terms of how your application looks. So now you are on the top layer, and you can pick and choose. Am I going to use Twitter Bootstrap? Am I going to use Topcoat? Am I going to use Ratchet? Am I going to use Ionic? Again, these are all options that you can choose. And in that case, if you want to switch to another option, you want to leave Ratchet for Ionic, for instance, that should be fairly easy because there is no tight coupling between these layers. Okay, and so this afternoon we'll talk more about that. We'll pick two. I think I gave away already which ones we're gonna use. And this afternoon, by the way, so make sure you get your proteins and your coffee because this afternoon we would like you to actually build an app, and you'll see it's going to be actually fairly easy, and it's going to be cool as well. But this afternoon we have a little lab for you. With that, Holly, are you going to use mine?
Let me try to switch over. I think I'm still connected to your...
Okay. Question in the meantime. Holly's going to get ready. Yes, I mean, that's essentially what I had on the slide, right? That. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, you're right. So they have a clone, I think, of, I mean, by that I mean they have a Webview kind of thing. But it's not the only way to use it. You can still use Sencha with Cordova. Because I think the ecosystem, and not just my own, the ecosystem around Cordova, obviously, this is where it happens. This is where, you have all the contributions by all these vendors being made. So my bias here would be, if I want to use a hybrid solution, I'll go where, the contributions happen. Yeah.
It's coming up now.
Oh, okay. All right, so. Yeah, and in that case, that's fine. I wasn't sure if it was their own. This is what we're doing at Salesforce, for instance. We have the Cordova, SDK, and we build specific capabilities on top of that, and that's really cool. I mean, that's the way many people use Cordova these days. Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right. You good?
Yep.
All right. Here's Holly.
All right, so if everybody was able to go to that URL earlier, we're going to actually go through a few steps on there if you want to follow along with what I'm doing and so that you can use it for reference later. So this is the URL again that we're working with, this project that we've been working with in the last two sessions. So what I was going to show you are a couple plugins that you might be interested in when you're building your mobile apps that are easy to add and use. And I wanted to just show you a couple other little tips when you're configuring your mobile apps before we close up here. So on step 12, the first plugin I'm going to show you is how to use an add to calendar feature that will work with the native calendaring on any device. Well, not any device, but I believe it's on Android, iOS, and whatever the plugin supports here. So we're using a third-party plugin. There's actually a bunch of really good plugins, and I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Maybe you know, because he's from the Netherlands. But if you go to Eddie, you know how to say it? Okay. If you go to this GitHub repository, he's actually contributed a lot of plugins to the repository for PhoneGap builds and Telerik for their verified plugins. So check his plugins out, but I'm going to be using two of them. And the first one is this calendar PhoneGap plugin. Did you guys get around to actually adding a plugin this morning to your project? Or has anybody used plugins? Okay. So what Michael went through this morning is when you use the PhoneGap developer app, you already have all of the core plugins available to you. But if you wanted to use a plugin like this to test with your app, you're going to have to use the CLI and test it locally. So I'm going to show you back to the tutorial. So in module 12, you can use the Cordova or the PhoneGap CLI to add a plugin using that Cordova plugin add or PhoneGap plugin add command, and you point to the GitHub repository that you want to add a plugin to. So this works for any third-party plugins, not only just the PhoneGap core plugins. So in this case, we're going to point to this URL, and we're going to be using the functionality provided by this plugin. So if you wanted to look at exactly how to use it, you could go over here and find out more details. So back in step 12, so let me show you what the end result is so you know what we're actually doing here. If we go back to the app, let me run it real quick. Oops. There was a tab bar at the bottom where we had an add button, and that's where we're actually going to be invoking this plugin. So when you click it, you want it to add that session to your calendar to actually remind yourself when you want to go to it. So let me open back the simulator. Whoa. All right, so if we search for some different sessions and then we go in and click on one, if we want to attend that session, then we want to add it to our calendar. We'll just click the add button and we get a notification that it's been added to our calendar. So at this point, if you actually go and look at the calendar, you can use Shift Command H, if anybody's wondering what I was doing there, to get back to the simulator calendar. And you could go look, and you can see that it's, I'm obviously late because it started at 1, but you can see that it was added to my calendar natively. And if you were running an Android device, the same call would actually be added to your calendar on your Android device. So that's kind of what we're trying to add here with this plugin. So if you go back into the tutorial, you can see, so in step 2 there, I'm just adding the tab, and this is using the Ratchet user interface to add that. So that's in the index.html in the project that you downloaded. And then in the initialize function in the session view class in sessionview.js, we're going to actually add a click handler to handle that tap on the add button. And then while we're in there, we're going to handle the event. So what do we want to do when it's clicked? We want to add to the calendar. And so this is where the actual functionality of the plugin comes in. So we check for the existence of the calendar plugin, of course, first. And then this is the part where I'm actually taking the data from the session object that I have available to me in this view. And of course, in this case, I know that it's today that, so this is a very simple example of adding it, but at the given hour that is set in the session for today, and setting it for an hour, and then I have just callbacks for success and error. And basically the call that makes it all happen is that window.plugins calendar create event. And there's where I'm passing in all the session details. And so if we went back into the event, you can see that it actually added the description and everything just with that one call there. And it will set alerts and do everything like that for you. There's actually more advanced features that you can do with that plugin, but you can look at the README from the repo to find out more about that. So that was the calendar plugin. Does that make sense to everybody? No, it's the actual, the object, the session object, like the, the session, like we're having a workshop now, this session. Nothing, no, sorry, it's confusing. All right, so then you can see the end result, which I just showed you. And then I wanted to also just quickly cover in part 13, we're adding the native share plugin, which also is by the same developer, and to get that URL of the plugin to add, you could just go in back in, oops. Obviously that one, it's a social sharing plugin. So this is the URL of the GitHub repository for what we're gonna add. So you can see that I just added to my project, and then again, similar handling, because I'm using that share button, we're gonna add the button to the tabs and then handle the click event, and then on the click is where we're going to actually call the window plugins social sharing .share. And there's actually a bunch of other methods available that you can use under there that you might want to check out. This is a basic one, but I'm passing, again, the information that I want to share. And so the options that come up are going to depend on your device. But for instance, you might see something like this screen. But if I actually run it, oops. If we say share, you can see that it pops up. You guys are probably familiar with this on an iOS device. So you might get like a message option or other ones as well, depending on your device. So that was kind of a quick, I'm trying to go quickly because I know lunch is in 4 minutes, but does that make sense to everybody? All right, so the other thing that I wanted to cover under the adding polish is just a couple of things regarding, so in the top I'm just styling it, that's nothing fancy, but the status bar handling, are you guys familiar with the changes in the status bar in iOS 6? So you might see that your apps start running into the headers, the status bar starts overlapping the headers. So if you're not aware of it, and don't already use something to fix it, this is another way that you can go about fixing it. You can actually add different preferences to your config.xml in the root, or you can programmatically handle it. So in this case, you can see my before picture here, how it's overlapping, and the background color is blue, but it's because it's transparent in iOS 6. But the font is black, and I might want that to be white. So you can customize different things like that using these different preferences in the config.xml, or you can do it programmatically in the device ready function. So if we look at the code, you can see, here in app.js, I've actually added the status bar overlays Webview. So that's actually going to tell it to not overlay it. So it's going to push it down 20 pixels. And then I'm setting the background color to match the background color of my app. And then I'm setting the color of the font and the icons. When I say style light content, that's just setting those to white. So the other option is to say style default, which would set them to black. So you can customize that through those two different ways, which I think is important to point out if you run into that issue. There are libraries out there that fix some of that for you, so you should be aware of that as well. You may be using a UI framework that already takes care of it and you don't have to worry about it, but if you do have this issue, this is how you can go about fixing it. And the other plugin I wanted to point out is actually from Ionic. You may notice when you run the app, this little keyboard accessory bar will show up depending on different form fields that you may have in your app, and you may not want it to pop up. And so you can use this plugin from Ionic here at this location to, once you add the plugin, then you can just simply say hide keyboard accessory bar, and then the next time you run it and you start typing, you will no longer get that popping up because it gets kind of annoying, and you won't have to hit done or do anything like that. So I wanted to point that one out. And are you guys familiar with the Web Bounce effect on iOS or the overscroll? So if you're not, by default, when you create an application, it's going to have that set to true. So it's going to do this Webview Bounce thing where you can actually pull down. Let me see if I think I already fixed this one. Let me try to run. Wait. I should have had this set up, but. So in this particular project, I have just commented it out. So it's this line right here that you can set the preference to say true or false. So by default, it's false. It's kind of backwards, disallow is false, but you really want it to be true to not do the bounce. So right now, if I have it set in this project 14, let me run it real quick. Hopefully I can show you guys. Basically, when you pull down on it, you're going to get like this bounce effect, and you're going to see the background of black underneath, like this, which is weird. So you probably want to be aware of that, and then go back in and set it to true. So really, you want this to be true to fix that problem. It's actually setting a value in the iOS plist for the project, which maps to the same. It used to be called Webview Bounce, I think, and then it changed names, but it confuses people a lot because of the name change. So now if we run it again. Oops, hold on. Here it comes. So now I can't do that anymore. So it's just a one-line quick fix, but definitely something to worth noting. And then there's one more thing I wanted to talk about quick. Are you guys familiar with the recent changes with the icons and setting icons in the config file and how they automatically will get copied down? If you're not, this is a newer, more recent change, and I have an article on my blog that goes into detail about it all. So if you go to devgirl.org, you can see the top couple blog posts are related to some of the stuff that we're talking about today. So you may want to go through and read that because there's a lot of details there. But one thing I wanted to point out is by just specifying, you could specify just one icon, and it will get copied down to all of the different places it needs to be in the platform folders for icons, so it'll automatically be used. It's not the ultimate situation, you know, depending on how you want to handle things with resolution and stuff like that. But if you just set this one line, you're going to see that my icon shows up here, and like if you're typing in the Spotlight search, it's going to show up there by just having that one line included when I run the build. If you guys go through and try this out, you'll see how this actually works. But it's an easy way to specify an icon quickly and see it actually working in your app. So I think that's about it. I think it's 1:30, but I think this is a good place to stop. You have questions? I'm sorry? No, they're all in Cordova. PhoneGap is actually based on, it's wrapping Cordova, so everything that's in Cordova is also in PhoneGap. So everything that I'm showing you is possible in Cordova as well. And you can use them interchangeably. But there's a lot of details about the icons and the status bar and all of that on my blog if you want more information. But I think that kind of covers a lot of the tips that you need to be aware of when you're building a mobile app without some of these helper frameworks that are out there now that take care of these things. You guys should be aware of these little issues that you could stumble across depending on what you're building. And then the next session we'll go into actually building an app using a framework where you don't have to worry about a lot of these things. That's it.